Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Thursday everybody. Today's episode will be very much focused on the Chinese economy. First up, we need to briefly take note of two major high-level government moves related to the economy. First, in a State Council, China's cabinet, executive meeting, Beijing approved a so-called Special Action Plan for clearing arrears of enterprises, suggesting that the payments issues between governments and businesses are still quite bad. This is a concern that has been on Beijing's radar for some time now. Back in April, the Politburo stressed on the, quote, issue of overdue payments to enterprises, more work must be done, end quote. Almost half a year later, it appears that more work still has to be done. Second, in a rare move, the powerful National Development and Reform Commission, People's Bank of China, China's central bank, Ministry of Commerce, and the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology held a big joint conference on Wednesday to basically talk up how well the economy is doing, as well as criticize those commentators, analysts, and investors concerned or critical of China's economic outlook. Indeed, it was more of the latter than the former. The key economic policymakers issued a stern rebuke against what it called a malicious effort to attack its economic prospects, stating that, quote, the bearish China argument is doomed to fail, end quote. The deputy head of the National Development and Reform Commission expressed, quote, we hear noises both internally and externally that talk down on China. This kind of rhetoric has never been successful and will not succeed now or in the future, end quote. The central bank said that it will continue to implement a prudent monetary policy in a targeted way to strengthen counter-cyclical adjustments and policy reserves. Speaking about the yuan's exchange rate, the bank said that though the yuan has depreciated against the US dollar following a higher dollar index since mid-July, the Chinese currency has maintained its strength against other non-dollar currencies, which is indeed accurate. State media wrote that the conference made 6 clear signals. 1. Being bearish on China and talking down China is doomed to fail. 2. There is no deflation in the Chinese economy. 3. The exchange rate of the US dollar to the yuan is not the whole story. 4. There is support for local, especially grassroots, fiscal stability. 5. The interest rate for most qualifying existing first home loans will be reduced. And 6. The development momentum of high-end equipment manufacturing industry is positive. This list likely also tells us what economic policymakers are the most concerned about. To coincide with this event, state-run Xinhua has been publishing a series of commentary pieces titled Taking a Broader View of China's Economy, in part attacking analysts and media outlets for what Xinhua calls selective reporting. Quote, a slew of sensational yet biased Western media reports about China's economy have raised eyebrows recently, drawing attention to some of the old tricks employed by those media outlets to disgrace the Chinese economy. Double standards, selective blindness, false narratives, manipulation of statistics, to name just a few, are among the handy tricks some Western media employ in depicting China's economic landscape. The use of such tricks is pervasive, as deep-seated ideological bias has left many Western journalists incapable of objectively assessing China's economic performance, and certain media outlets are even driven by profits to resort to smearing and sensationalism, end quote. However, regular viewers will note that here on China Update, much of the coverage discussing the concerning aspects of China's economic outlook primarily cite outlets, reports, and analysts within China itself. State-run Global Times writes today that the Wednesday joint conference, quote, was helpful in improving the perception of foreign capital on China's economic outlook and lifting confidence in the Chinese economy, end quote. Of course, the fact that the state has to go through this to communicate that the economy is okay is in of itself quite telling. In trading on Wednesday, the day of the conference, The Shanghai Composite Index closed 0.52% down for the day. Next up, we need to briefly note that several more major cities have dropped housing purchase restrictions. These cities are Wuhan, provincial capital of Hubei, Wuxi, a wealthy city in Jiangsu province, and Xi'an, provincial capital of Shanxi. These are big cities. In 2022, the GDP of Wuhan, Wuxi, and Xi'an all exceeded 1 trillion yuan. On Tuesday, 6 departments in Wuhan City issued a notice affirming the cancellation of housing purchase restrictions within the Second Ring Road, effective immediately. These cities join a growing list of municipalities pulling back restrictions to boost local housing demand, so far too limited to no success, though it is still too early to tell definitively. From the 1st of September through to Tuesday, the 19th, Shenyang, Nanjing, Dalian, Lanzhou, Qingdao, Jinan, Fuzhou, Zhengzhou, Hefei, Wuxi, Wuhan, and Xi'an, 12 cities, have fully cancelled purchase restrictions. Then, yesterday, the southern megacity of Guangzhou also further loosened housing purchase restrictions. In an interview this week with state-run financial media outlet Daily Economic News, Chen Wenjing, director of market research at the Zhongzhi Research Institute, expressed, quote, "Core cities still have room for optimization. Second-tier cities are expected to fully cancel the restrictive policies introduced during the overheated market phase," end quote. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin writes this week that in September, market sentiment has been somewhat boosted. However, quote, "the transaction volume and housing price levels remain to be observed. The latest data released by the National Bureau of Statistics on September 15th shows that the national real estate market is still in a slump in August, with the number of cities experiencing a decline in second-hand housing prices reaching a new high in nearly 9 years. End quote. Meanwhile, according to a new CBRE Group report, as of June this year, nearly 24% of the office tower space in 18 major Chinese cities was unoccupied as of June. This is compared to 18.2% in June in the United States, where office vacancy rates have hit a 30-year high. Next up, Pettis on understanding economic processes through the structural lens, and just why China is really seeing economic slowdown. If you're enjoying today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing are all helps for the channel. And for anyone who can go that extra mile and help me keep China Update financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. This is a lot of work, but all your support are all incredible sources of motivation. So thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Okay, to end today's video, we examine a statement made this week by Peking University Professor of Finance Michael Pettis on the importance of thinking about China's economy through a structural lens. We are now quoting selected salient points made by the professor directly. It's hard for most of us to understand structural issues that drive an economy, and we much prefer to personalize them, blaming problems on bad leaders or vicious habits. But in doing so, on the subject of China's economic slowdown, those of us who failed to understand the problems China already faced 10 to 15 years ago, and who weren't sufficiently skeptical about the prevailing China hype, are simply creating a new way of misunderstanding the Chinese economy. Pettis then makes reference to a US media article which was released this week, which writes, quote, "Most, though not all, China watchers point to Xi himself as the instigator of the recent changes that have led to the rapid reversal of China's growth momentum. Beijing's anti-market policies in the past 3 to 5 years, they say, explain the reversal." End quote. Pettis strongly pushes back against this argument, expressing, "Not only is this not true, but it borders on the absurd. If every country that has followed this development model has gone from a first stage of rapid sustainable growth to a second stage of rapid but unhealthy growth driven by deep imbalances and surging debt to a final stage of very difficult adjustment, why do we require a sudden and unexpected change of direction among Beijing policymakers to explain the same pattern in China? While it's true that recent policy shifts in Beijing may have made things worse at the margin, it's important to understand at least three things about China's economic slowdown. First, this slowdown was predicted long ago. It was the inevitable and predicted consequence of over a decade of rising imbalances and unsustainable increases in debt, both of which were the very consequences of the excessively high growth rates of the past 10 to 15 years. Second, because of these deep imbalances, deeper than any other country that followed this model, there were only a limited number of paths the economy could follow, all requiring either slower growth rates or contentious political reforms. China accounts for 17% of global GDP, 12% of global consumption, and an astonishing 30% of global investment. It is obvious that investment must slow sharply, which means that unless consumption surges, and how, GDP growth must also slow sharply. Third, the very policies that many analysts are blaming for the slowdown were in fact the consequence, not the cause, of the slowdown. The shift from a less market-oriented to a more state-oriented economic focus was largely the consequence of a shift from the hard budget-constrained parts of the economy to the soft budget-constrained, itself the consequence of setting 10 to 15 years of GDP growth targets that exceeded what the real economy was capable of delivering. If we feel compelled to blame someone for China's problems today, we should blame the Hu administration, because they knew, before 2007, that they had a serious problem, and because that would have been the easiest time to force through the necessary reforms. But even that would be superficial. No government has ever transformed a winning development strategy once it became obsolete. For reasons Albert Hirschman explained decades ago, just as he also explained why every successful development model must make itself obsolete. It has long been the case that for most analysts, the main purpose of China is to confirm whatever economic prejudices they already held. That is why many analysts had to go from a belief that China's rapid development was the automatic consequence of China's abandonment of government intervention in the economy, an almost laughably silly claim, to the belief that China's economic slowdown is the equally automatic consequence of China's renewed infatuation with government intervention. It simply isn't true. China's slowdown is structural and is happening almost exactly as predicted by some of us over a decade ago. That is also why the whole Japanification narrative arose. This matters if we want to understand the limited number of ways in which the Chinese economy can adjust, how unevenly those adjustments' costs will be distributed domestically and internationally, and what kinds of policies will actually matter to China's long-term growth. Here ends the direct quote and today's episode. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a wonderful Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.